You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll discuss the Donald Cerrone versus John Makdessi bout from UFC 187 in Las Vegas and break down the end of that fight as well as other unusual finishes in MMA. Big John and I will also examine Daniel Cormier's win over Anthony Johnson in the main event of that card and the issue of title fights that follow the occurrence of a reigning champion being stripped of or vacating the belt. Plus, we'll look at the UFC Hall of Fame and give you our views on the induction class of 2015. And as we do on every single episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. So fire away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And of course, you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. UFC 187 took place last Saturday and featured a really strong card on which you refereed, John, and featured a very unusual ending in the Donald Cerrone versus John Makdessi fight, refereed by our good friend Jason Herzog.
Yeah, I thought Jason, did a great job with that fight. What's you really got to look at with it is John Makdessi took that fight on basically 2 weeks, notice because Donald was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, and you look at the timing that occurred with that for them to keep that fight and to give Donald the fight was really impressive as far as the machinery and the abilities of both Joe Silva and Sean Shelby. But John Makdessi did not have a lot of time. He took that fight, and he took that fight against a guy that is known as an incredibly tough fighter, a guy that's going to come out there and bang hard with you. John is a very good stand-up guy. Donald's a very good stand-up. You got to figure it was going to be a stand-up, battle. But what occurs with that when, John got hit several times, and you can have pains when you're fighting, and you don't feel them quite the same as you would in normal life. But he got hit with multiple shots, multiple shin shots to his, head and jaw area. And that last one, I think he felt it. It broke his jaw completely in half. He goes and he calls timeout. He steps back and he motions his hands with a timeout. And many people were confused by that. Jason Herzog did a great job of stepping forward, saying, are you okay? And he's shaking his head, and he called the fight off right away. That's the second time that Jason has had that type of situation. If you go back to Bellator from San Diego when Will Brooks fought Michael Chandler, Jason had a very similar situation where Michael started to actually almost try to call timeout on a fight. A fighter cannot call time. This is not like football or basketball. Timeout is taking an advantage. You don't get to do that. And a referee can call a timeout based upon being fair to the fighters. But a single fighter can't call a timeout. John couldn't call a timeout, and Jason stepped right in. He called the fight. It was the right thing to do. And it was the right thing for John Makdessi's health. That broken jaw, that is not an easy thing to fight with. There's people that have done it, but all broken jaws are not the same, and there's a difference between many of them. And his was absolutely broken in a bad way. The doctors, right away said, no, he's got a problem. He's going to have surgery on that. It's not just setting it. So Jason did a fantastic job in getting John out of the fight, even though John was the one kind of getting himself out of it.
It's an interesting situation, and you compare and contrast with what happened last November in Bellator with Chandler versus Brooks, too. So Makdessi, I don't think his brains were scrambled. The kick broke his jaw. His signaling time was essentially like tapping. If he were on the mat, one would think he may have tapped out. It went down as a TKO.
It was a tap.
It was really a submission. It was definitely a submission.
It's a tap. It's not a submission. It's a tap.
It went down. It was logged by the state of Nevada. We might need to talk to Bob Bennett about that, head of Nevada. It was logged as a TKO, but that's stuff that probably people like you and me only worry about.
It does. It's a matter of the way Jason's the one that makes the call. And you can look at it and say, well, I'm making the call based upon the fact that he tried to call timeout. He's not allowed to do that. He's hurt in the fight. And because of the injury is why the fight stopped. That would make it a TKO. Or another referee can look at it and say, he tried to call timeout. That is the same as a tap. I'm going to say he basically tapped out of the fight. Either way is fine. It doesn't matter. The biggest thing is you're getting the fighter out of a situation where he could become more, damaged, and let's get him out. So if he wants to come back and fight again, he can do it once he gets healed up.
So Makdessi was willfully, and in his right mind, he was clear-eyed asking for the way out. But in Chandler Brooks 2 in Bellator last November, Michael Chandler told me he did not remember that. He got clipped with a punch. A lot of people thought that he jammed his head and his neck on the takedown before, but I think that's pretty much been put to bed. That wasn't the case. He got clipped in the temple. Chandler has no memory of trying to say, hold on a minute, kind of signaled time, but kind of putting his hands up like, wait a minute, almost like, where am I? No memory of that, has no idea why he did it. I thought that was a much more difficult situation for Herzog. I commentated that fight. I said it on air. I thought it was pretty courageous by Herzog. Unusual things happen at a very high level. The Makdessi thing was a little more clear. The Chandler thing was just odd because it was really a glancing blow, but it was a glancing blow on his temple by Will Brooks. And Chandler was kind of taken out of his mind to a place where I don't think he knew where he was.
Not only did he not know where he was, he didn't know who he was. That's what people don't understand. And when you sit there and you try to give, Jason credit on this thing, Jason deserves a ton of credit on that fight, because I'm telling you, this is what separates the good officials from the bad officials, is that Jason had, I hate to say it in any other way, he had the balls to sit there and make the decision. The fighter is not reacting in a normal fashion. The fighter is doing something that tells me that their mind is not on this fight. He is not who he was when he walked in here. He has a problem, and I'm not going to sit here and let him accept unnecessary damage just because I can't make a decision. Jason made the decision. It's a hard decision to make. You're going to have a ton of people coming down on you saying, no, you should not have stopped that fight. You're wrong. You're an idiot. Your mother's ugly, all this stuff. Okay. And you know what? It takes a great referee to make that decision and be confident in their decision that they're doing the right thing. And Jason was absolutely right. He was right in that fight. He was right in the Cerrone Makdessi fight. And that's why Jason has separated himself and is one of the better referees that is out there right now.
John, as a boxing referee, I was taught when I started back in the 90s when I was a kid that if a fighter in boxing turns his back, it's essentially physical surrender. Obviously, you don't have a submission. Roberto Duran versus Ray Leonard 2 aside, you don't obviously have a submission in pro boxing, but turning your back is like a physical submission, but we don't
call
have
it
that
abandoning
in MMA.
The fight.
But we don't really have that in MMA. Fighters turn their back all the time.
Here's the difference. In boxing, we're talking about a two-dimensional sport. In boxing, we're cut at the waist and we're cut right along, the ear line all the way down to our waist. And that front area, we can be attacked, and we cannot be attacked to our back. So if we turn our back on our opponent, what are we doing? We're, in a sense, basically calling timeout, saying, you can't hit me, and I'm turning away, and I'm making it so you cannot have any offensive output, which is, in essence, trying to call a timeout. In MMA, we're a 360-degree sport. We can attack the back. So when someone just gives their back, the referee's got to make a decision based upon what he's seeing in the totality of the situation, the totality of the circumstances. He's got to make a decision. Is this fighter able to intelligently defend themselves at this moment with what they're doing? Is that a reasonable action? And, we had that at UFC 187 again, when you had Andrei Arlovski against Travis Brown. Take a look at all of the times that Travis got hurt and Mark Smith let the fight go on, and he was right for doing it. And then it got to one point right near the cage where Travis gets hit with two big blows, the last one being a right hand, and you see him turning his back towards Andre and moving himself down against the cage. And that told Mark, you've had enough. This is not anymore an intelligent defense. I'm going to get you out of here. And that's what we're talking about with good officiating.
when I was watching Cerrone versus Makdessi, I immediately thought at the ending of Chandler Brooks, and I thought, how ironic, it's Herzog in both. But I also thought about a fight that I commentated. This wasn't Jason Herzog. It was Jimmy Smith and myself, Tokyo 2008, when we were the M1 commentators. It was Mike Dolce versus a really young Carl Amasu. Dolce does well in the first round. In the second round, Amasu starts to get his kicks off. He lands a liver kick. And anybody who's been kicked in the liver knows that there's sort of that weird delay. It's like a groin shot almost.
There's that 2-second delay.
And Dolce took the kick, and you could almost count 1, 2. And then Dolce waved his hand off and turned his back to Amasu and walked away. It went down as a TKO. But again, that's really saying that I'm abandoning this fight. That's a submission. Dolce didn't call time. He just recognized, wow, I was kicked in the liver. It was a brutal shot. This fight's over. I'm not going to take any more damage. But there was, again, that sort of weird, awkward pause. Amasu wasn't quite sure what to do. He's a gentleman. He didn't follow up. But there's always sort of that weird hitch in those situations.
It is, because it's just not the normal. A fight has a flow. It has a tempo. It has a pace. And all of a sudden, when someone does something like that, it interrupts that tempo. It interrupts that pace. And it throws the other fighter off a little bit, like, the other fighter's not in there to permanently or personally try to damage their opponent. They're in there to compete. And even, when they get they're in that competitive mode and they're trying to win, but all of a sudden someone will do something that is just not the normal reaction that they get while competing, and it throws them off and it makes them kind of stop. And that's why we have these things set up, as far as, a fighter can't call time, because it's going to make his opponent stop that attack, because the opponent's going to be like, what is that? Not that they're going to look at it and say, you can't do that, I'm going to continue on. Boom, boom, boom. Doesn't happen. So we have these things that occur that we talk about as officials, of what we need to do, why we're going to do it this way. And this is, not the norm, but it is the thing that can happen. And you look at, Jason, it's happened to Jason now twice within basically a 6-month period, that he handled absolutely perfectly in both situations. And that's why you need to commend Jason Herzog.
John, what would you tell fighters who find themselves in the situation that John Makdessi was in versus Donald Cerrone, that Mike Dolce was in versus Carl Amasu, where their head is clear, but they want to get out of the fight, but they're standing, they're not on the mat where they can tap?
They have the ability. We even talked about it with them in the back. If you need out of the fight, you need us to stop the fight, you can tap out. You can tell us. You can, in any way that you need to tell us, I am done in the fight, just give us that verbal, give us that motion, anything that we can say they want out of the fight, and we're going to do it. And it's, you get a lot of people, fans out there, that are going to denigrate, a fighter for quitting. That bothers me more than just about anything else there is, because to sit there and say that the guy is quitting, he's can go no further. He's given his best. He has been damaged by his opponent in a fashion that, if you've never felt those things, and I can tell you, I've never had my jaw broken, so I can't say what it's like to have your jaw broken. I've had a lot of other things, and I've definitely been hit by liver shots that make it to where you cannot physically stand up. Your body starts to shut down, and everyone should have that moment where they're hit with a good body shot that paralyzes them, because they would have a newfound respect for fighters. And when someone does go to the ground, they understand why, and they'll give incredible respect to the fighter that fights through it, because it's not an easy thing to do, and all levels of those body shots are different. So, when someone sits there and says, "Oh, they shouldn't be quitting," look, there comes a time when you have physically been beat in the fight, and if you need to get out of the fight, we want to get you out.
John, in situations that you've had as a referee where a fighter, for lack of a better term, gets his brain scrambled, what's the weirdest thing that you've seen? Because we can talk about this in all combat sports. And even if you look like in the NFL, the mind can take you to some really odd places when it gets jarred.
Oh, my God. It's incredible what will happen to people. One of my favorite stories is, as far as refereeing, as far as the outcome of the fight and what took place after, was I had a fight. It was in a very small show, and two guys come out, and one guy lands a huge shot. The first shot of the fight, he just hits this guy and just stiffens him. And the guy falls back to where his head hits the frickin' canvas really hard. We call it a coup contra coup blow because he gets hit with the punch. That's the coup. And then the contra coup is when his head slams off of the ground. And he's out, and I stopped the fight right away. And the fight's been 6, 7 seconds. And he is out, unconscious. When guys are unconscious, they're making a lot of different noises. And it's different. A lot of people panic, when it's the first time that they're near it and see it. But they make, they'll make a lot of, snoring noises, but it's a very heavy, trying to suck air in noise. And eventually he, comes back after about a minute and a half, he's out. And by that time, his opponent has already, done all of his high fives, jumped up on the cage. He's got his shirt and his hat on. And this guy, we now sit him up and we sit him on, just up onto the canvas, and he's sitting on the canvas. And then finally we get him to a stool and we put him on a stool. And now, he's sitting on the stool, and it's been about 4 minutes since he got knocked out. And he's looking at everyone, and he looks, and he says, all right, when are we going to start this fight? Why is everyone in the cage? And he says, why is he able to wear his sponsor before the start of the fight? And he's sure that he hasn't fought. His team, his trainer is there. He says, Bud, man, you fought. You got knocked out. He goes, no, I did not fight. I didn't. And he was 100% absolutely adamant he had never fought. And this is what happens. And brain injuries are something that most people don't understand, but it is our biggest challenge for officials and for the fighters to deal with. And we need to be conscious of what is going on with that fighter. We need to understand what's going on, and we need to understand what that fighter needs to have done after the fight to make sure that they are protected and they are cared for in the right way. So this doesn't become that lasting injury that they can't overcome, similar like we've talked about, with, Veronica Rothhalter.
John, your story makes me think of the 1991 boxing heavyweight fight between Tommy Morrison and Ray Mercer. And I was a big Morrison fan. I think anybody who grew up in that era in Kansas City like I did just really followed everything about Morrison. Morrison was undefeated coming in. Mercer had obviously been an Olympic medalist. But if you remember the
Olympic gold medalist,
absolutely. And John, I guess I know you remember the fight. But for those listening, if you remember the fight, Mercer starts landing big headshots. Morrison gets tangled in the ropes but doesn't fall. So Mercer's basically blasting with everything he has an unconscious Tommy Morrison. I guess because it was 1991 and not 2015, they decide to sit him on the stool after he's been knocked unconscious, which now seems a really odd choice, but they sit him on the stool. Morrison, when he wakes up, he starts shadow boxing. I think he was in his mind getting ready for the fight. I mean, how bizarre. He started, and you can find it. It's on YouTube. It's on Daily Motion. They do a close-up of Morrison after he's been completely knocked unconscious, deep concussion. He's sitting on a stool, and he starts warming up his hands. It's unreal.
Yeah, and these are the things that occur, and this is what people don't understand is, fighters will go on. They'll actually go into what we call a repeat, and everything that has happened from a certain point they don't recall, but they recall that one point, and where they're at, they will start doing the actions or the motions of where their brain comes back as to what it remembers. It doesn't remember the fight. There's no way in the world Tommy Morrison knows anything about that entire fight. He forgot it. It got knocked out of his consciousness. And, that's what happens sometimes with fights. So he comes back into that almost his pre-fight, starting to warm up and starting to just move his hands and getting ready. That's where he came back at. And this is what happens. And this is why, when we talk about injuries and people, complain about officials stopping fights, you have no idea the seriousness sometimes of what the official is dealing with and what they're trying to basically manage for your entertainment, but for the safety of the fighter. They're always going to go, and once they see that fighter cannot do things in a fashion that are reasonable, not intelligent, they're going to end up stopping the fight. And there's fans all the time that get mad about it, but the fighter needs to live with the damage that is occurring for the rest of their life. And we want to make it to where that is a minimal impact in the rest of their life.
Ian Butland, who's now an MMA commentator in the United Kingdom, he fought for us for Team England when Jimmy Smith and I were the commentators for M1. And he told me a story about when he was an amateur boxer as a teenager at the youth level in the UK before he turned to MMA. He suddenly found himself backstage and he was a little disoriented. So he looked out to the arena, looked to see who was fighting, looked at the bout sheet, thought, these guys are after me. Oh, I guess I already fought. And then he had to ask, what happened? Oh, you lost. You got knocked out. Oh, that's disappointing. Just weird. It's almost like time gets erased. Like you just delete moments or hours, or in, I guess, the worst cases, even days. They're just gone from the memory bank.
And that repeat mode will happen time and time again. Here's one of my, it's sad when I sit here and say it. It's a funny story, but it's actually sad when you think about what is occurring. Matt Hughes went to Kuwait to fight. There was a tournament done in Kuwait where they took actually some of the best welterweight fighters at the time and put them all together in a tournament. Matt Hughes was in it. Jose Pele Landy Johns was in it. Dave Manet was in it. Carlos Newton. There was some really great fighters. Barkalev and Matt Hughes his first fight is matched against Jose Pele Landy Johns. And Matt takes him down. And and I can tell you, I'm reffing it, and Matt is straining really hard to hold him down. He's squeezing really hard, and you can see his lat is even just quivering. And I'm thinking to myself at the time, I'm thinking, man, relax. You need to relax. You need to relax. And it's just not happening. Well, it ends up where Jose gets out of it and they get up to a stand-up position and Matt shoots for a takedown and Jose launches a knee and it just hits Matt flush on the chin. And I see his eyes go work and he's falling forward and I stop the fight. And in Matt's corner is Pat Miletich and his manager, Monty Cox. And, right away they start yelling at me, John, no, you shouldn't stop it, right? And they can't see Matt is still down on the mat, right? And I looked at him, and basically in my very eloquent way, I told him to shut up. And Matt comes up onto his knees and he kind of turns around and his eyes are still going in different directions. They go, okay, good job, you're right, good job, and it was, and that was fine. But what happens is they go into the back, and when they go into the back, there's the locker room, and Matt is sitting on a bench. And Monty is sitting next to him, and Pat is standing there, and Matt gets into the mode because he can't remember. And so he looks at Monty, and he says, what happened? And Monty tells him, you got knocked out. He goes, how? He says, it was a knee. When? He goes, first round. And then he says, where are my shoes? And Monty looks, he says, right down there by your feet there. And 20 seconds later, Matt looks at Monty and says, what happened? And Monty looks at him and goes, you got knocked out. How? It was a knee. When? The first round. Where are my shoes? And that was the second time he asked it. And then he goes and he asks it a third time. And Monty's answering it. And finally, the fourth time, he goes into the same thing. And he looks at Monty and he goes, what happened? He says, you got knocked out. It was a knee in the first round. Your shoes are right down there by the floor. But this is what occurs. And it's a funny story when you look at it, but it shows you the severity of what occurs in fighting when we talk about injury to the brain. And some of these knockouts are severe, and the impact to the fighter can be severe. Now, obviously, Matt was able to overcome that concussion, because that's a concussion. And he came back and became the fighter that, was a 9-time UFC champion, one of the greatest champions of all time. And he has done, had an incredible career past that point. But there are those fighters that are not able to recover from those. And this is the severity of the sport that we work within. There are, elements to it that are dangerous for the fighters. They're dangerous while they're in the cage, and they can be dangerous as far as how the fighter is able to, recover and live the rest of their life.
When Buster Douglas knocked out Mike Tyson, one of the biggest upsets in the history of boxing 25 years ago, 1990 in Tokyo, a lot of journalists who should have known better, a lot of fans who probably should have known better, were so confused that when Tyson was ultimately knocked out, when the count is going on, He's reaching for his mouthpiece. People, why is Tyson doing that? Because Tyson has no idea what's going on, and his brain took him not to stand up, but you need to grab your mouthpiece. His brains were completely scrambled in that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is what happens is people look at Mike Tyson as he's invincible. Well, that can't be happening. What's wrong with him? And Mike Tyson's human. And man, you know what? I don't care who you are. If you affect that computer, which is that brain upstairs, anybody can have their brain scrambled and anybody can have a reaction that is not the norm of what people expect.
A lot of referees, and we thank them all, listen to our podcast every week. John, as a final point to this, what would you advise referees listening, no matter what level they're refereeing at in MMA or boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, any sport with a lot of violent strikes, if they find themselves in a situation like John Makdessi, who's calling timeout, or Mike Dolce, who was walking away, or even Michael Chandler, who's just utterly disoriented, because it's so far from the norm. You might get this, once in 1,000 times?
Absolutely. And that's part of our job. And the one thing I will tell them, what you need to do is you need to prepare yourself for all of these situations. And that's an incredible task that I'm asking them to do. But if there's a situation that can come up that you can just visualize in your head, that you can think about, and you don't know the answer, then we have a problem, because you've got to know the answer. You're the one who's in that ring that needs to understand, what is my solution here? And if you don't know, then you need to find out. That means you need to start asking someone that does know. And if their answer doesn't sound quite right, because it might not be, then you need to search out the ones from someone that's going to make sense, and you can sit there and say, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And all of these situations are things that they're going to occur. They may not occur to you. They may not happen when you're the one in the ring, but they're going to happen. And if you can learn from it, because it's going to make you a better official.
Every week on this podcast, Big John and I answer your questions, which are consistently excellent. Keep them coming via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And of course, please include instructions on how to correctly pronounce your name. First up, a listener from Bremen, Germany, who included a pronunciation guide for his name. You go right to the front of the queue.
You're a happy man.
I very much appreciate it. Bastian Cunning. That's a fantastic name, by the way, Bastian Cunning. I really like that.
That's bold.
So his question, all the way from Bremen, Germany, why is the discussion only focused on 10-9 and 10-8 rounds in MMA? I think some rounds could be scored 10-7 or even less when one fighter clearly does not show any effective offense.
Well, I think we need to work ourselves, right now. It's a great question, but we need to work ourselves through our 10-9, 10-8 problems. Because for the most part, I'm going to tell you, most fights are stopped by the referee when it's getting into that. The judge is going to start marking a 10-7. There's very few rounds that I can look at and say that was a 10-7 round. In fact, I have, when I teach, there's a couple that I bring up. One is a new one, and you look at Mark Hunt against Stipe. You look at the beating that Mark Hunt took. You look at the lack of offensive output by Mark Hunt. You look at the damage that's done dependent upon, the positioning and what Stipe is doing. We're looking at possibly a 10-7 round for MMA. You can look back to Cyborg Finney. I use that fight all the time. The first round of Cyborg Finney, she got knocked down 5 times by either a punch, a knee. You look at 5 knockdowns. If this was boxing, we started looking at it, we've gone to our limit of 10-6, and we would even go beyond it, but we can't as far as, the score of the round. So when you're sitting there and say, even going beyond 10-7, there's really not going to be, I don't think, ever a 10-6 round that you're going to see in MMA, because the referee is going to be stopping the fight. Can we have 10-7s? Yes, we can. They're very rare. Do we need to understand the difference between the 10-9 and the 10-8? Absolutely. That's where our focus right now needs to be, because we have too many officials out there that are too strict in their opinion of when they need to give the 10-8. The 10-8 criteria changed. In 2012, the ABC changed that criteria from overwhelming to large margin. When we talk about a 10-9, it is a close margin between the fighters. When we look at a 10-8, it's a large margin between the fighters. And you can look at the Stipe versus Mark Hunt fight. We had an official that gave every round to Stipe 10-9. And we can't have that. That's an official that's not looking at this fight in the right fashion. Because if you're thinking that those are 10-9 rounds, we've got a problem. And so we need to, at this point, still work at getting our officials to understand what is a 10-8 round. And yes, you need to be able to pick it out from a 10-9 round, because that's what's fair to the fighters. That's what's fair to the fans. Because we can have it where we have a 10-8 round in the first round, and we can have it switch over and be a 10-8 round in the second for the opposite fighter. You don't know what's going to happen in this fight. You just need to give the fighters what they deserve.
Outstanding question, and a special note, we really appreciate the international listeners. What are we in, like something like 80 countries, John? It's amazing. We appreciate our North American listeners, but we're really, really pleased by the scope of this. So great to get the questions come from Germany, come from the U.S., like Susan Walker, our next questioner, one of our most loyal listeners. So Susan asks, how come some refs will tell fighters to keep busy when they're definitely being busy? You hear them say it over and over. It can get annoying when it is obvious that the fighters are being busy.
Well, it depends on depends on the official, and it depends on certain situations for the official himself and what is going on. We have to be clear about what is actually working and what is not. When we say, if I take somebody down and they put me in their guard, and I take my head and I put my head to the center of their chest, and I keep it down close so he can't really hit me with anything effective, and I start going body head, we will tell fighters in the back, if this is what you do, I want you to right now, that's stalling. You're not fighting. You're not doing anything, because what we want the fighters to do is we want them to do things that can end the fight. You're always working towards ending the fight. So putting my head down and throwing body head, I can't generate enough power to end the fight. I have to posture up. I have to bring my head up, and I have to posture my body so I can utilize power. I can utilize my strength. I can still utilize my hips. I can utilize gravity to help me with that power. So just the difference in the positioning of their body is going to say whether they're working or whether they're not, whether they're stalling. A lot of officials will be intimidated by the crowd. The crowd many times is sitting there, and the official knows, okay, I got a guy on top who's doing the right things to, win this fight. He's getting position. He's working towards submissions. I've got to let him go. But the crowd is screaming, stand him up, and all this stuff. And the official feels like they need to do something. So they'll sit there, and instead of, standing him up, they're going to say, work. And so they're doing is like, well, I'm telling them. And they have this feeling like they need to address it in some fashion. The real thing that we need is we need officials to be fair to the fighters. And the fans don't want to be fair to the fighters. They want excitement. They want Andre Arlovsky versus Travis Brown. They want that kind of fight all the time because it's exciting. It's dramatic. It has what people are looking for when they're looking for fights. And it's just not MMA. It's part of MMA. It's one part is what they did throughout it. They had one section where they did go to the ground, and it was for a fleeting moment. They were back on their feet, swinging for the fences, doing small glove kickboxing again, and that's okay because that's part of the sport. They can do that. But we'll get a lot of people that will have opinions based upon the fight going to the ground. They don't see the setups. I can't tell you how many times I've had fighters that are on the ground and I got the crowd screaming, stand him up, John. Come on, Johnson. What are you looking at? And I see the setup that the fighter is doing. And I'm like, give it 5 more seconds, and I'm going to take my middle finger and just flip the bird to you because the fight's going to be over. And then it does. The guy gets the submission, and I just look around and like, yeah, you guys know a lot. Because they don't care about what's fair. They care about, they want excitement. And if something's not exciting to them, they want you to interject yourself and do something to make it exciting when the referee can't do that. The referee is there for the safety of the fighter. The referee is there to be fair to the fighters. If the referee is starting to interject themselves in a fight in an unfair fashion by separating people when one person is fighting exactly under the rules of MMA, he's grappling, he's moving position, he's doing things to bring an end to the fight, and you're interjecting yourself and standing him up. Well, now you're being unfair to one fighter over the other. We need to, the basic, simplest thing for me to tell everyone is there is not one referee that can make a bad fight good. Not one. If a fight's going to be bad, it's going to be bad. But there are a lot of referees out there that can make a good fight bad. And that's what you need to avoid.
That's really well said. So keep your emails coming to us every week from Germany, from the U.S., from around the world via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, John and I will examine the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship bout from last Saturday, Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Johnson, and discuss the issue of interim versus full title fights, and we'll give you our thoughts on the UFC's 2015 Hall of Fame induction class. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock. You are listening to Let's Get It On.
Hey everyone, join me and Sean Wheelock in St. Louis, Missouri. You have a chance to win 2 tickets to Bellator's Unfinished Business with Ken Shamrock and Kimbo Slice. What I need you to do, if you can be there on June 19th for that show, I need you to go to www.letsgetitonpodcast.com and click the Win the Bellator ticket button. When you click on that button, you need to fill out the form, and then you need to share the contest on your Facebook or Twitter and listen to Let's Get It On to hear the winner announcements. If you want to be part of the show, you want to see Ken Shamrock against Kimbo Slice in person, along with me and Sean Wheelock, be sure to enter. Go to letsgetitonpodcast.com.
It's the book that Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back. Pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now online at ascendbooks.com and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50.
For all of our listeners looking for great new designs in MMA apparel, look to the new clothing styles of Lambs to Lions. That's right, Lambs to Lions has got new styles with old and new put together. Boxing, MMA, everything. Go to lambstolionsbrand.com and check out their line of clothing.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Following the overwhelming success of the California State Athletic Commission's Media Day, which took place this past April, and which we discussed on episode 7 of this program, the Kansas Athletic Commission has announced that they will host their first Media Day. While California allowed members of the press to serve as shadow judges at Bellator 136, Kansas will focus on refereeing at Bellator 139, set for Wichita on June 26th. And no, media types won't actually be in the cage refereeing, but they will get professional instruction as well as hands-on experience working backstage and cage side with Big John McCarthy and Rob Hines, 2 referees assigned to that Bellator event. Now, I know that a lot of MMA journalists and reporters do listen to this podcast, so if you'd like to apply, you can email Kansas Commissioner Adam Rohrbach at Rohrbach, that's AROORBACH at kansascommerce.com. Again, AROORBACH at kansascommerce.com. You can also email us right here, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, and we will forward your request on to the Kansas Commission. This opportunity is limited to just 5 media members, so if you're interested in a shadow refereeing opportunity at Bellator 139 in Wichita, Kansas, set for June 26th, apply right away. John, this is really cool. And look, you're the impetus, so I'll give you full credit. You talked to Andy Foster about doing this in April with the judges in California. You're going to be a part of this along with Rob Hines, set for June in Kansas with the referees.
Yeah, well, the whole purpose of this is sometimes there's a miscommunication between the media and the regulatory bodies and the officials as far as what is done, why it's done, how it's done, what really is, what the officials should do, what are the fighters actually told. And this should be transparent. There should be no doubt about what's going on in the back. There should be no doubt about what's said to fighters. There's no doubt about what the fighter knows the official is going to do, why they're going to do it, when they're saying something, what it means. All of that is important for the media to know, because the media is the one that reports this to the fans. And then if they report something that's wrong, they've just given misinformation to the fans, which now the fans believe is correct because they're reading it. It's a news source. And then when another official does something that is the right thing, but that media source has already, come up with something that is opposite of it, now we have confusion. Now we have people saying there's conspiracy. There's all these things that are going on, and it's just not true. So the more that we can be open, let the media in, let them see exactly what's done, let them see exactly what's said, let them hear the backroom talk between the referees and the fighters and what they're told and why they're going to be allowed to do something or what they're not allowed to do or when the fight's going to be stopped. All of these things are going to be something that's going to help the media in reporting why the fight was stopped and giving good information out to the fans as far as what is said to the fighters, what they were told, what they knew before the fight started, and then what actually occurred. Was it exactly what the referee said they were going to do? And that's all good. And if, a media person is looking to be good, then they're looking to be knowledgeable. And if you want to be knowledgeable, then you know what? You need to sign up with the Kansas State Athletic Commission and be part of this, because it's something that I can tell you that the ones that came out to California, they all loved it. They enjoyed it. They said they learned so much. The one that cracks me up is Mark Raimondi. He says, I can't watch fights the same anymore. It's killing me. Because he says, I'm looking at it as an official. It's not the same. I look at the fight different. And you do. It's a different fight. It's a different way of looking at things. So this is an opportunity that anybody in the media should jump at.
We, of course, had Mark Raimondi on. He's from MMA Fighting, one of the best MMA writers out there, outstanding journalist. So he talked about his experience in April as a shadow judge for California. We will definitely have one of the participating journalists on from Kansas, from that Bellator card, talking on this program what it was like to be a shadow referee. Well, Daniel Cormier is, of course, the UFC's new light heavyweight champion, claiming the title with his highly impressive submission win over Anthony Johnson, which, of course, John, you refereed at last Saturday's UFC 187. And because John Jones was stripped of his title, there was no defending champion in this bout. And, John, I think it's really telling the stance that the UFC is taking on John Jones, that this was for the full title rather than for the interim title.
Absolutely. I mean, it was even, Bruce Buffer, before the fight started, he looked at me and he says, this is for the interim title. I go, no, it is not. This is for the UFC's light heavyweight title. This is not an interim. He goes, oh my God, you're right. And, started scribbling off on his thing because I think he was going to say for the interim title. When the UFC decided to, strip John Jones, they're stripping John Jones not because John is not able to fight, not because he's refusing to fight. They're stripping John because John is not able to represent at this moment the sport and the UFC in the fashion or with the ability that the UFC wants out of their champions. And this can happen. This is not denigrating John at all. He's got some problems. He needs to fix those problems. I've said that before on the show. But John can come back and be, everything he was plus. in the future. He has the ability to come back and fight in the UFC again. He'll have the ability to go after that title and get his title back because it was his title. But I hear a lot of people saying, oh, it's tainted. Dan Cormier is not really the champion. John Jones is. And you know what? That's just not true. There is no doubt. Go ahead.
John, I was going to say there's no doubt he's the champion. And this was a total decision by the UFC. This is a promotional decision. The state of Nevada, of which this was in Las Vegas, so they were the regulatory body, the ABC. There's no outside group or body or organization who's going to tell the UFC title or interim title. The UFC made the decision, and I agree with you. Cormier definitely earned it. Anthony Johnson has been in phenomenal form, and Cormier, coming off of the first and only loss of his career, rebounded, and he's absolutely the champion, in my opinion.
Absolutely. This is no different than what, Bellator did with Brandon Halsey. They stripped him of his title. There is a middleweight title in Bellator that is unencumbered. There is nobody holding that title right now, and that is because Brandon did not uphold his responsibility as the champ. And that responsibility is to come in, be on time, make weight, and he wasn't able to do that. And they said, you know what? We need to show everyone. And it wasn't just showing Brandon. Brandon's the one that gets punished for it. He's the one that has to deal with, the repercussions of it. But they're telling all of their fighters, hey, we need you to do things the right way. We need you to act the right way. We need you to do what is your responsibility. We need you to be on time. We need you to make weight. And, the UFC with, John Jones, I don't know. It's tough for a promotion to take a guy that, no doubt is the pound for pound best fighter in the world and say, you're no longer our champion. That is not an easy decision. That is not a decision that comes just on a whim. That takes a lot, and it takes a lot of courage for the UFC to actually say, you know what, this is what's best for John. It may not be what's best for my company. It may be. There's some, dissenting opinions on that. I think it is what's best for the company. I think they need to send a message to every fighter on their roster of, you know what, your ability to fight under our banner for our company is not a right, it's a privilege. And you need to understand that. And we expect certain things of you. We expect you to act and be the type of fighter that we're proud of. We expect you to do things the right way. And if you don't, we're showing you that the best guy that we have, we will take the title from him. So don't think that we won't take something from you. And you know what? That's the way to do it. Tough love. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's not nice, but it gets people's attention and it tells them, I need to do things the right way.
And overall, John, I think interim championships are awkward. I mean, the UFC right now, they have two heavyweight champions. They have Cain Velasquez, who's been plagued by a series of injuries. He has not fought since October 19th, 2013, but he's still the quote-unquote heavyweight champion. But then you have Fabricio Verdum, who's the interim champion. I know you and I were talking this week privately, and neither one of us are fans of the interim champion. We had that in Bellator. Eduardo Dantas was injured, so Joe Warren beat Rafael Silva. He's the interim champion. Dantas is the champion. They're unifying a belt. Awkward's the right word for it because that's what it is.
It is. And I understand why promotions do it, especially when you get in a situation like Cain, like Dominic Cruz, like what happened with, Dantas. It's a matter of you have a guy, he hasn't done anything wrong. He is the champion. He has won that belt inside of that cage. He did everything that he was supposed to do. But as he's getting ready for other fights, he gets injured. And, it can happen. And then sometimes he gets injured again. And things start to prolong to where you cannot end up having anybody in that weight class progress because everything's on hold because the champion, which is who everyone is going after, can't fight. And there comes a point where it starts to stagnate that weight class for your promotion and you need to make a decision. And that's usually when the decision for an interim belt is put in place. And that's exactly what, happened with Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz was a dominant champion. Here's a guy that has one loss on his career and he is a dominant champion and he gets hurt doing that Ultimate Fighter show. He ends up getting re-hurt when he's training for a fight. And it goes on and on to the point where they finally said, we've got to let the class move on. We've got to let these other people, fight for this. And so they end up coming up with the interim title, and then they end up finally stripping him completely and making, the interim champion is the champion of that weight class. It's understandable. It's never something where you want two champions in a weight class, because then it starts to muddy the waters. But I can understand why they do it. I just, the situation with John Jones is completely different. They did not do anything as far as interim. Everything they did there was straight out and open. You know what? He is no longer our champion. And when Anthony Johnson fights Daniel Cormier, they will decide who will be the champion of the UFC at the light heavyweight division.
John, where do you come down in the case, though, of Frank Mir? When Frank Mir was the UFC heavyweight champion, he suffers injuries outside of fighting, outside of the cage, outside of training. Ultimately, he's stripped, and they say, forget an interim champion. We're going to have a new quote-unquote champion.
Well, the Frank Mir incident is a little bit different. This is where you get into the, other aspects of fighters are responsible for, their own bodies. Their bodies are what makes them money. And I tell guys all the time, look at, when that body is your ability to put cash in your bank, that's what's going to, pay for your living. That's what's going to pay your bills. You sometimes need to make decisions that are based upon keeping that body, in the best shape possible, the best form possible, and not taking risk with it. And, I can tell you, look at, Frank got hurt in a motorcycle accident. I'm not saying it was his fault. He got hit by a car. It broke his femur. He had some complications with that. They couldn't have the heavyweight title for a while, and they finally decided that's it. We need to strip him and let two guys fight for it. And that's what occurred. I'm not saying it's nice, but it's fair. Frank made the decision. I've ridden motorcycles my entire life. I just sold my bike recently, and my wife's very happy about that. And I'm itching to get another one now because I love riding motorcycles. But if I go and I ride a motorcycle and I crash it and I can't work, that's on me. I'm the one that put myself in that situation. Is there other forms of transportation that are safer than riding the motorcycle? Yes, there are. No matter what you say, a car is a safer form of transportation than the bike. Less chance for injury in it. You're not going to fall over. If you do get hit, at least there's some type of protection there to help with it. It's a choice. And when you make that choice that puts your body, what is the instrument for you to make money, at jeopardy, and that happens, and the only person you can look at and blame is yourself. And that's really what happened with Frank. Again, it's not Frank's fault that that happened to him. He obviously has come back and made a hell of a career after that injury, but you got to be smart. When you're that fighter, you need to be smart about what you do, what you put in your body, what you put around your body, what you put your body on. It's all important. You got to think about it because you only have one.
Well, we talked about fighters like Frank Mir, Daniel Cormier, big names that potentially one day could be in the UFC Hall of Fame. The UFC, they've refitted their Hall of Fame. We'll talk about that in a moment with the new categories. The 2015 induction class is now set. So here are the recipients. BJ Penn in the modern era category. Boss Rutan.
Outstanding pick. I love that.
Fully agreed. Boss Rutan in the pioneer era category.
Outstanding pick. I love that.
The late, great Jeff Blatnick in the contributor category. John?
The best pick.
Phenomenal. I love Blatnick. What a great man, great commentator. And the second Matt Hughes versus Frank Trigg bout in the fight category.
I know that's Dana's favorite fight, so I know that's why. That's when it went in right away. And it was a great fight. It's funny that there's a lot that went on with that fight. And there's some things that occurred. Mario Yamasaki was a referee, and if you talk to Mario will sit there and say, "I made a mistake. I let this happen. I shouldn't have." And then I let it go far because I didn't. I felt bad for Matt, and that's what made that fight what it was. Matt Hughes, he tweeted me and said, if you were the ref of that fight, it never would have happened that way. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but there was a lot of things that occurred. But if you look at the comeback by Matt Hughes in that fight, because Matt got kneed in the groin. He got hit in the groin, and Frank went after him. And Mario did not. He started to go to stop it, and then because Frank went forward after him and started hitting him, he hesitated. And we can all we need to make the decision. but Frank went after him. Frank actually knocked him out on the ground and then hits him with another shot. You can ask Frank, and woke him back up. And eventually Matt ends up getting himself up, getting a hold of Frank, running him across, the octagon while holding him up over his shoulder, and chokes him out. And it was a great fight. And if you're going to look and say, from the earlier days, yeah, it absolutely deserves to go in there. That's a great fight. There's other fights that are going to be in there. No doubt Dan Henderson against Shogun will be one. And I think, you got to put Bonner and Griffin, even though they're both in the UFC, that fight itself has got to go in there. John Jones against Gustafsson, that fight will go in there. There's a lot of great fights, but the one with Trigg and Hughes, it's a good recipient being the first.
So this is the first induction class, as we mentioned, the reformatted UFC Hall of Fame. So again, the categories: modern era, which is fighter; pioneer era, which is fighter. I guess they're saying pre-unified rules. Contributors, which is really anybody that you can think of who doesn't fall into those two categories. And then the fight category. And again, for me, BJ Penn, Bas Rutten, Jeff Blatnick, and Hughes versus Trigg, two, all great choices. I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, my friend, but there are two hugely glaring omissions: you and Art Davie. And I'll put it out there. You and Art Davie are two of my best friends in the world. I don't want to make you have to be in an uncomfortable position to say yes or no. I'm just telling you that it's ridiculous that the founder of the UFC, the man who brought in Rorion Gracie and Bob Meyerowitz and 7-4 Entertainment Group and John Milius, launched the whole thing, Art Davie is not in, and you, who have been the referee in our sport since UFC 2, that you're not in. I don't get it. I don't know if you care. I don't know if Art cares, but I care.
No. Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. But, I'm going to say it this way. I really am thrilled with them putting Jeff Blatnick in as the first person under that contributor role into the UFC Hall of Fame. It means so much to me. I actually went up and, I was at the UFC 187 and saw Joe Silva, and I went and thanked him. Now, people don't know the story of what really occurred. I know what really occurred through time. Joe Silva knows what really occurred through time. And, I will tell you, I wrote a book. Well, I guess I wrote it because I wrote a lot of it, but let's get it on the story of the ultimate MMA official, or whatever the hell it was. That was done by me and Loretta Hunt. And Loretta Hunt for years had asked me to write a book, and I kept saying no, 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 no. And the way she got me to write that book was, she said, there's people out there that are being passed over by history that you know about. She goes, what about Jeff Blatnick? And when she said that, I said, okay, let's write the book. Because I thought Jeff was getting passed over. I thought Jeff was someone that was being forgotten, because in the beginning, I met Jeff at UFC 4. And, I'm going to be, flat out honest. Jeff didn't know anything about MMA. He had no clue. And we sat there, and the first time we met, we sat there arguing, because he's sitting there, asking me who I think's going to win and things. And I told him, Royce Gracie's probably going to win. He said, how can you pick a small grappler against a big grappler? He says, Dan Severn's a proven grappler. I said, Dan Severn's a proven wrestler. I said, I've known Dan as far as his accomplishments in the wrestling world. He's fantastic. He's a great guy. He has no idea what to do past wrestling. This is not wrestling. This is a fight. There's too many submissions and things that he doesn't understand that he's going to get caught by. And when Royce ends up choking Jeff out, I see him, that night, and he goes, you've got to tell me about this. And Jeff and I started working out, and I started showing him moves. And Jeff became absolutely enthralled with MMA. Jeff became one of our greatest supporters, because Jeff was an Olympic gold medalist, and he had what, he had the credentials. He had people that, could look and say, yeah, this guy's for real. And we used his credibility as a sport. We rode off of the back of Jeff Blatnick and his 1984 Olympic gold medal. And he allowed that to happen. He helped us. He helped writing the rules. I can tell you that, a lot of people sit there and make claims about who wrote things. There was moments when Art Davie and I wrote them, and then there was moments it was Jeff Blatnick and I that were writing these things. And Jeff did a fantastic job in promoting the sport out of the no-holds-barred age into the mixed martial arts age. It was Jeff. I'm not saying Jeff came up with the actual first words of mixed martial arts, but we had talked about it. And when we decided to try to push that, Jeff was the one that was pushing it. He was the one that was making it happen. Everyone was saying, that sounds horrible. MMA, mixed martial arts. And Jeff just hung on to it, kept using it in every broadcast. Every time he did an interview, anything that he did, he used mixed martial arts till it finally caught on. And it's Jeff Blatnick's the reason for that. Jeff Blatnick was the reason that Joe Silva is still part of this sport. Jeff Blatnick was the one that when Semaphore didn't want to bring, Joe, who they were using as almost a consultant, didn't want to bring him anymore because of financial costs. Jeff Blatnick hired Joe and started having Joe do work for him. Jeff Blatnick was the first one that brought Joe Silva a computer so he could do the work. Jeff Blatnick was super important to our sport, and I'm thrilled that they're putting him in there. I just wish my only, point of all this is, Jeff died several years ago. I have a picture from UFC in Toronto that we did together just shortly before his death. And, I hold on to that picture because it's got, just a bunch of officials, Yves Levine, Josh Rosenthal, Herb Dean, myself, my wife, and Jeff Blatnick. And my only sad part of all of this is that Jeff won't be there. I can't call Jeff and tell him congratulations. I can't go there and be part of him being inducted because I know it would have meant the world to him.
John, for me, Jeff Blatnick was the first real MMA commentator. And again, you're talking to someone whose mom bought him all the early pay-per-views, of which I still have, sadly, on VHS. I stick with my old Sony VHS, which has got to be 15 years old, just so I can play those. I actually watched UFC 4 not long ago just to watch the Gracie Severin fight. And what Jeff Blatnick did not know, he learned. And what a gracious man. He, up until the end of his life, he was a judge for New Jersey, for Mohegan Sun, and I would always talk to him at Bellator's. What a nice, gracious man. He said one of the greatest things that I ever heard on any MMA broadcast. I wish I could emulate it. I wish I could come up with such a great line. It was probably around UFC 6, UFC 7. And it was still when Art Davie was bringing in all of these very exotic-sounding martial arts, the Penchaxalots of the world. And Blatnick on the broadcast said, look, you either punch, kick, or grapple. Everything else is the theory behind it. And I just thought that was so genius. He just boiled it down to that element.
And that's true. And, the best part about Jeff was he was, for a guy that had accomplished a ton in his life, he was very humble about it. He never looked at himself as anything special, but he wanted to learn. And if any chance he had of learning, he was 100% behind. I can't, I've seen more photos of Jeff, and me working out or sweating. And, I can tell you, man, it got to a point sometimes I was like, God dang it. I would be teaching him stuff and, he'd have to be on top of me. And finally I'd sweep him or pull him over and be on top of him just because I couldn't stand him sweating on top of me anymore because he sweated like a Niagara Falls. But just one of the greatest guys ever. In our sport, did so much for the sport. It's absolutely possible that the sport would not be here today if it wasn't for some of the actions of Jeff Blatnick.
Every week on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. So here we go with this week's question. Do you feel that the UFC Hall of Fame should expand to include pro MMA fighters from other organizations? Vote yes or no at letsgetitonpodcast.com. Boss Rutan John maybe is the closest to someone who made his name outside, at least in MMA, outside of the UFC. That was in Japan, largely in Pancrase, but he did fight twice in the UFC. I guess we're talking about Fedor Emelianenko, Igor Vovchanchin, those types of fighters.
Boss absolutely made his reputation out of fighting in Pancrase. That was where he had most of his, incredible fights out of. The two fights he had in the UFC, Tsuyoshi Kosaka being the first and then Kevin Randleman being the last, great fights. He had one fight outside of that being for the World Fighting Alliance.
Ruben Villarreal.
There you go, baby. Who fought Warpath. But, I look at it and I would love to see Fedor Emelianenko, honored in a Hall of Fame. Does he fit in the UFC Hall of Fame? No, he doesn't. He never fought there. And I look at this and there's a ton of hockey players there were incredible hockey players that are not in the NHL Hall of Fame because they never played in the NHL.
Vladislav Tretiak, the Soviet goalie.
Tretiak, Soviet goalie, is incredible. I mean, one of the greatest goalies of all time. He's not in the NHL. He never played there, so he can't be. You know, there's you can do the same thing in, you know, all sports that are worldwide or even some that are just countrywide. You know, let's be honest. You've got the NFL. Who is the greatest Canadian football player of all time? It's going to be Doug Flutie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Doug Flutie is by far the greatest Canadian football player of all time. Now, he's not Canadian, but he's the best. He is in the CFL Hall of Fame, and he's not going to be in the NFL Hall of Fame. Now, he did play in the NFL, but he didn't play at, you know, a time or for a length of time or do the things that would have given him that credential, that criteria to make it in there. And so you got to be fair. It's the UFC Hall of Fame. I don't think that they should, you know, have to, you know, appease everyone by putting in a Vochanchin who never fought for them, by putting in Fedor, who they wanted to have fight for him, but in the end, he never fought for him. It's not, you know, it's not essential that they put those people in. It's their Hall of Fame. It's people that have done things and fought for the UFC, done things for the UFC that belong in their Hall of Fame. There are other MMA Hall of Fames out there. You know, there are other MMA Hall of Fames that have Fedor Emelianenko in them. You know, I am in one, you know.
Legends of MMA Hall of Fame. We were there.
Exactly.
Monty Cox inducted you. I inducted Art Davie.
Ash Bowman is the one that, you know, does that. He does a phenomenal job with that association. The Legends of MMA has got Fedor Emelianenko in it. It's got Rickson Gracie in it. Those are two guys that I absolutely believe belong in an MMA Hall of Fame. But I don't think they belong in the UFC's Hall of Fame because they never fought there.
Well, in the UFC, they're not being disingenuous. They're not saying we're the MMA Hall of Fame, but limiting it to UFC fighters. They're saying we're the UFC Hall of Fame. Quite frankly, it's their Hall of Fame. They can do whatever they want with it.
Exactly. You know, and it's like, you know, you can't please everyone. There's always going to be someone who says, well, if they don't have, you know, Fedor in there, then it's not a real Hall of Fame. No, it is a real Hall of Fame. No different than any other one. You have people that played outside of your league, outside of your promotion, that were phenomenal, but you're not going to recognize them because they never were in your league or your promotion. And so how do you recognize them since your Hall of Fame says the NFL's Hall of Fame, the UFC's Hall of Fame? It makes sense to me, and I don't think that the UFC is doing anything wrong. I'm really happy with the fact that the UFC is doing what they're doing as far as the categories, you know, bringing Boss Rutan in. Boss has done a ton for MMA. He's been there. He's supported MMA in, you know, such a good, you know, lighthearted, funny, educational way that I'm so happy that Boss has been honored the way he is going to be honored and being brought into the UFC's Hall of Fame. He is a pioneer in the sport as far as, you know, he was doing things that were a little bit different than other people. He was just unique in his strength and his ability because he was never a big man and he always fought heavyweight. And then you look at BJ Penn, no matter what anyone wants to say about the total record, BJ was a guy that always went after fights that were interesting to him. He didn't care about size. He always wanted to be the little guy fighting the big guy. And, you know, at one time was absolutely the dominant lightweight champion of the world for a long time. He absolutely deserves that modern era fighter. It's a great choice, I think. And I think their entire class of what they did, it's the best year by far that the UFC has had based upon, you know, these new elements and that it's multiple people that they're bringing in. You know, they're bringing in the fight with Hughes and Trigg, bringing in Blatnick, bringing in Boss, bringing in BJ. You can't have a better class.
Fully agreed with this caveat. You and Art Davie need to be in. That's my new cause to leverage. There we go.
I appreciate that. That's very nice.
We are back with you next week for an all-new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And, of course, you can go straight to our website, which includes every weekly episode as well as our archives, all free of charge, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter, @PodcastMMA for this show, and for us personally, @John McCarthy MMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Once again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And please help us spread the word about our program. This is your podcast as much as it is ours. For John McCarthy, our producer Chris Lakin, and our entire crew, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.